First, this webinar will be recorded and you will be receiving a copy of the presentation at a later time. You can also direct all of your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. They will be answered at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to our first speaker to get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Sydney. Hi, everybody. Welcome. On today's webinar, we'll be covering how your teams can overcome data chaos to drive efficiency and compliance. So my name is Allison Del Grande, and I'll be the moderator today. I'm joined by two incredible guests who will walk us through our content, Matthew Wright and Victoria Chapman Galloway. So Matthew is the founder and CEO of SpecWrite, the first cloud-based platform for specification management. SpecWrite has been recognized as a Gartner Cool Vendor, received the Salesforce Innovation Award, and was named one of the top places to work by the OC Register and Built in LA. Wright is also a published author, and his book, The Evolution of Products and Packaging, was named to the Amazon Hot New Release list for industrial relations business and has a 5-star rating. Prior to founding SpecWrite, Wright spent more than 25 years in the packaging industry, holding leadership positions at International Paper, Temple Inland, and WrightPack, a packaging company he co-founded. He's also been involved in leading multiple M&A deals in the packaging industry and sits on the Packaging Advisory Board at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And Victoria Chapman Galloway is a packaging engineering professional with 25 plus years engineering management and leadership experience in the food, consumer products, and pharmaceutical industries. In addition to packaging engineering expertise, she has experience in packaging sustainability, quality systems, supply chain demand, manufacturing, distribution, and marketing through her work experience with OFI, Kind Snacks, a division of Mars, Campbell's Soup, Johnson & Johnson Consumer Products, Colgate-Palmolive, and Kraft Foods. Victoria is a graduate of Michigan State and has curriculum completion from Wharton Executive Education. She's currently global head of and VP of Packaging Center of Expertise at OFI, where she is building a packaging structure that supports OFI's new vision expansion from selling raw materials to value-added solutions and services. Thank you so much, Matthew and Victoria, for joining us today. And now just for a quick overview of our agenda, we'll start by covering industry challenges specific to food and beverage companies, breaking down the data solution, then diving into the OFI use case and how they overcame their data chaos, the value of a spec-first approach, the importance of change management, and finally, we'll be closing out the session with a live Q&A. So as Sydney said, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A function. And with that, I will pass it to Matthew to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Allison. Always great to be with Victoria and enjoy our conversations and enjoy being here with everybody today. You know, I think it's without a doubt, everybody understands that the food and beverage industry is just under tremendous challenges. And we're going to talk today about how data can help you through those challenges in your business today. You know, some of these challenges are, if you'd advance, Allison, some of those challenges, as we know very well, is under regulatory pressures. You know, we look at all the various different regulatories, EPR on sustainability, food safety, really kind of coming at us from all different directions and angles. And the big question and challenge today that a lot of companies are looking towards is data. You know, and not just data, but what data? What data is necessary that they need to be able to meet these challenges and these expectations today? And I think the biggest one that's coming on top of that is consumer expectations. There's just a much heightened awareness from the consumer. The consumer has a lot larger audience or ability to voice their opinions and thoughts. And so you look at this regulatory pressure, sustainability, data complexity, data completeness, and then ultimately the consumer's expectations increasing. This is causing a lot of companies challenges and really concern about the path forward and how they have to change their business. You know, so what I talked about at the onset, and I continue, if you've heard me speak before, we'll always talk about data. Data is really the solution. We can no longer look at these problems and these challenges, or really the business models today, and do it with just projects or do it with a lot of energy, a lot of people. We really have to stop, pause, reflect about where we're at today, and ultimately it's going to be very challenging going forward. So why is data such a challenge? I think there's two sides to that. One, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, is it's everywhere. And data everywhere is not good. I always talk about, if you have data in more than one spot or one location, it really slows the process down, and it makes us not sure if we can act upon the data we have. In addition to that, is everybody's working a little bit on a different piece of the data. Business historically is kind of built around silos, and certainly those silos in of themselves all contain pieces of the data, maybe pieces that are really critical for their business function and other pieces that are critical for somebody else's business function. So we see data everywhere today. But I look at the world differently, and I think more and more people are starting to kind of think through this process. Everything to me is a spec. You look at this picture to the right, there's hundreds, if not perhaps thousands of specs within the picture itself. And a spec is really the common baseline DNA of product. And you build those specs together. So you look at this particular drawing or photographic representation of food, and you obviously have recipes. Within recipes, you have various types of specs within those. Down to the ingredient level. And then you have the specs that really bring those together to create product. And then you have the specs that create the packaging those products go into. And all of this data needs to be a singular thread of data because, as we just talked about, the regulatory, sustainability, consumer expectations are that we know what that is at any given time. And if something changes in that thread of data, instantly we know that change and where that change has affected other products and other packaging. So how are people managing this today? I think most people are aware that it's not being managed well. If you add the bars to the right of our annual spec survey, kind of how people are managing specifications, that number is 220%. So kind of back to my first point, that's 2.2 times the data track of every element. And if you look at specifications as hundreds of data elements, you now have great complexity of data. You don't know which data is accurate. You don't know what's actionable. And I always say the most damaging thing here is not the 220% as much as the method of sharing, the method of the network is email. And so I've often heard people going back to their emails to trying to find the latest spec. Well, that's certainly not an area that you feel comfortable putting your regulatory consumer expectations upon. And so, as I mentioned before, you have to think about specification management as the core fundamental base of your data structure. All companies generally have to operate with an ERP system. Perhaps they may or may not have a PLM system and other systems, but you have to rethink in the data first approach, data structures at the baseline and the most valuable. And then you bring that data through, whether it's, different types of systems, integrations with those systems. You look at things like analytics, workflows, those all should lay on top of the data structure. The data structure should be very common, not only to your company, but to multiple companies as you work together. And what's exciting as I started from the beginning is letting Victoria, who I love working with and talking with, really talk about the real application of what specification data management and really data and the importance of data in her everyday life. So Victoria, I'd love to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Matthew, and it's great to be with you as well, and Allison, and all of you on. Thanks for taking the time today to talk to us. Let me start by telling you a little bit about OFI. OFI is one of those companies that's really huge in the background, but some have never heard of. So we're one of the largest ingredient suppliers in the world. We work off of 5 platforms: coffee, cocoa, nuts, dairy, and spices. We have over 11,000 customers. We're relatively young from a global company perspective. We were established in 1989. We have over 120 manufacturing facilities and 80,000+ employees. So we're huge, and there's lots that is involved in running a company and being efficient and effective when you have this breadth of operation. So as the things that Matthew talked about, I'm going to touch on in the rest of my conversation on the need to be efficient and to meet the needs of our customers. So as we were before, and as Matthew has talked about, in joining OFI, are moving from a strictly commodities business to business solutions, where we are private label. We are working with customers to provide them end-to-end solutions. And in doing so, we were looking for, where's the data? One of the first things from a package engineering perspective is, where's my specs? And they were everywhere, and they were in everything. They were Excel, they were Adobe, they were, people's Word documents, they were in handwritten files that were left on people's desks. And so you can see that what happens is, if, say, for example, a person is not at the company any longer or has moved to another role, where are those files? Where do they go? How do we maintain and know that we always have the most efficient and the most correct data in making our decisions? So what this leads to is inconsistent actions, really. And as we move into areas where regulatory is very important now and sustainability is important, we don't have the data at our hands in order to make those decisions. So how do we bridge the gap, and how do we provide a basis for understanding within a company that never had a system such as this? Because Matthew is so right. What he said is spec is DNA. So regardless of whether it's package, whether it's product, whatever it is, even if it's process, it is DNA. And so how do we bridge this gap? How do we get people to understand the importance? And for me, at OFI, it's getting the small wins. It's getting the system in and showing in a small subsegment of all of those areas that we talked about, that we can make this huge impact just by having data at our at hand. And so those are the things that we worked on, and in working with SpecRite, those are the things that I'm still to this day bringing to the OFI system. And it is a process, but we are absolutely making progress in how we're bridging the gap. So there's a few things that I want to talk about that are real life scenarios. Some people might find this hard to believe, but I've worked with SpecRite for a little while now. And one of the issues that I had in maybe a past life is that there was a system that was necessary, a pallet pattern design system that was necessary. You have to get individual seats, and in a specific company, there was one seat that was purchased. And so you had a line of engineers that would wait on a daily basis to go to the system, use it, get the data, print it out, bring it back. Or sometimes we would be able to email it back, but you'd have to bring it back. Then you'd have to go back to your desk and work on it. That is just totally inefficient. There's a lot of pain in doing that. It's frustration. Your customers internally are feeling as though it takes you forever to get things done. So this was a huge pain point for us. And one of the ways of solving that is with SpecRite and integration. And SpecRite was open to looking at areas that maybe they hadn't considered. And one of those was TOPS. TOPS is the pallet pattern software, and integrating that so that you're at a touch of a button at your desktop or on your mobile phone or on your tablet, you're able to link to this system, complete the analysis, bring it back into a spec, and you have a total cradle to grave specification for packaging componentry. Another case study is that, as I mentioned, from an OFI perspective, we have done a lot of acquisition, and we acquired O. Thompson, who is a leader in private label spices. And so O. Thompson had approximately 3,000 SKUs, and they were in various sizes. And O. Thompson, frankly, they had acquired a company the year before. So you may have had 5 4-ounce jars. And so which one do we keep? Which one is more efficient? which one is the best from a cost perspective and has the best benefit for us, and how do we work through that? It is absolutely impossible to get those types of answers when you don't have all of your data in a centralized location, and you can begin to look at how you rationalize, when you rationalize, and who you want to rationalize with. So that is what putting everything into a central repository has allowed us to do. It's allowed us to take everything that we have, these over 3,000 SKUs, and then we can do an analysis. We can look at everything that's in a 4-ounce jar and figure out how many suppliers do we have doing that? And then we could provide those reports to our procurement team. They can do an analysis on cost, which one is better? Can we consolidate? We also look at performance online, and we can make notations and have those carry with the product that say this one runs well and this one does not. So having this information at hand makes you more efficient, provides your internal customer with the confidence that we know what we're doing. We are using a data first approach, and then we can then build into those other things that we need to look at, which is sustainability, and all of the regulatory issues that are beginning to bubble up. So finally, the other case study that was had is that once we started pulling all this information in place, and you remember I said a couple slides back, how do we bridge that gap? How do we make sure that people understand the importance? And so in a meeting, we had loaded some data, and I was asked, well, how many of X do we have and how many suppliers? So if you think about just the previous example with the bottles, how many bottles do we have and how many different suppliers do we have? In the past, we were trained to basically say, let me get back to you. Give me a moment. I'll get back to you in a couple weeks, in a couple days. Let me dig into that. Let me go see what's on the spreadsheet. Let me figure out how we were able to do that. And what we can now do is we can now, sitting in a meeting, we can now pull out our phone or pull out our tablet and pull up the app, do a quick survey, a search, get a report, and say, well, you know what? We have 12 of these bottles in this size with this material, and of the 12, we have 9 different suppliers. And that's something that we can do in minutes versus weeks. So that, again, is how you go back and talk about filling that gap and moving this forward. So where are we today? Today, where we are is that we are the single source of truth for packaging components and packaging materials. And I need to specify that because there's some growth that we're now doing with SpecRite, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But we're the single source of truth. We now have all of our components, or many, let me correct that. We have many of our components in the system. And again, we are able to now make really large business decisions in real time on where we are, where we need to go, and how we need to go about doing that. We've also recently added LCA, which is the life cycle analysis, which again, from a sustainability perspective, when we want to look at those 9 different bottles, and we want to say which one is most sustainable, meaning that does one come from a longer distance and is using more CO2? Is one more water efficient? We're able to do that now by adding this life cycle analysis module. So all of this together is providing us with a vehicle and a tool that the business is beginning to understand has a great deal of importance. And what's important to a business? Driving efficiency and making money. And that's what this allows us to do. It helps us understand where we are, where we need to go, and how we need to get there.
Thank you, Victoria. It was great.
Yes.
Victoria is such a wealth of knowledge, and then seeing a data first approach is really very empowering, hopefully for everybody. I know we'll have a few wrap up comments at the end, but let's talk a little bit about the spec first approach and how we get to that point. Obviously Victoria's had some great successes in going the data first approach and layering, as I said, analytics or solutions on top of that to meet today's business challenges. But we really have to move along the paradigm of the steps. And we outline here 5 steps, and every company is at one of these steps or maybe transversing between steps. And I think the real important part is that we're honest with ourselves and that we have a champion that can be honest and can challenge the company and the thought process in that. And I would say definitely we're going to be sharing the materials out with you later, but definitely take this slide, if anything else, and the learnings you heard from Victoria, and take it into practicality and sit down with the team and talk about where are we in this process. So, again, we can no longer ignore what's going on around us. We have to have a data first approach. I think it's okay if companies are in the chaos or static state, because it's an understanding of where you have to move from there. And obviously we want to get to the intelligence state where we're really proactively the systems telling you what to do and what to look for. And it affects the business all around. Continue to talk about kind of these demands around us, but one we didn't talk about is cost reductions or things like that, or recalls and the impact of that to the consumer. Obviously waste, just pure waste that is not good for sustainability, not good for earnings, and not good for obviously the globe. And higher supplier compliance. I think that's one of the real challenges we have today. And why not do it in a digitized approach where actually the data and the system can continue to alert and can parse up where things are not working, where suppliers are not being compliant quicker and faster. We can no longer go back to that paper trail that we had that may be a year or two old for our compliance level. And obviously we want to get products to market faster. We know it's on hyperspeed today, and we have to keep up with that. So many great food and beverage companies, we just added several more this week, are out there. They've seen the journey. They've been through the journey. They're people that can be referenced or talked to about this journey and where they're at. Victoria did a great job of explaining where they're at and kind of the journey, and then what's in front of them, we're going to talk about in a minute. So many companies are doing this, and we just have to get started somewhere.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matthew and Victoria. Before we wrap up, I thought it might be nice for both of you just to share some insights, not just around the value of specification management, but also change management and the importance of that. I know it can be really hard to change team dynamics or processes that have been in place for years. So any advice you could give to our audience would be great. And Victoria, I will pass it to you.
Thanks. So the first thing that I would say is the key is inclusivity. We can no longer work in silos, which is what we're used to doing. This is my team. This is what we work on. We've really got to work across the board. We've got to be inclusive of everyone. And if everyone has a stake in it, then that helps drive it and move it forward. So I think that that's key. Kind of along the same lines is, excuse me, is that, everyone feels like they have a voice. They're heard. So obviously, you have people that are responsible and people that are accountable. But when you work across platforms and work across segments and sectors within your business, everyone feels as though they have a voice, and which again drives you into it having a data first approach. And then it's what's in it for them. It's personalized. It gives operations, for an example, how many single bottles can they use? That means fewer changeovers. That means improved, efficiency on our lines. Procurement, how much money can we save? So you give everyone a piece of something that they can look for. And what I want to also say is that it's not just packaging components, because we're now expanding from package componentry into recipe and ingredient solutions as well. So working on our recipes and our ingredients being in a spec right system, and our product developers would be inputting all of that information as they build recipes, as they validate, as they qualify, and then you would link that with the packaging spec. So again, from a sales perspective and a business perspective, you have a solution that is end to end. And the other piece that I also wanted to mention that we're also working with now is that from a regulatory and quality perspective, this is not our system for regulatory or quality. However, when we look at it from a package perspective and we see things like PFAS and BPA that we need to be accountable for, there's documentation that we get from our suppliers that can be housed with each of these components. So no matter what happens to it, if it's no longer used or if it's revised, it lives with it and it carries on. So those are some things that we're using to expand. But I also want to just say the last 2 points is to be clear in what you want when we're talking about change management. That takes some drilling in sometimes, and it takes a lot of revision, but be very clear on that and really define what you're trying to do. So again, thank you.
It's great to have you, Victoria, and always a thought leader in the space. And I think the key takeaways that I want to leave with everybody is force the discussion. You know, data is the answer. It's no longer, I love the stories Victoria shared. Everybody has those stories of how you're doing it today or did it in the past. But we really have to use data, and use data really breaks down silos as you're all working off a singular data track at the DNA level of product, and then ultimately have wins. And Victoria's obviously continues to progress through the maturity curve, but because it's early wins and it did things that help other people get their business and their job done. And again, you know, the technology is available today. I always talk about this, like we live a great technology world in our personal life. You know, I always say the off hours, but we really have not embraced technology the way we have in our personal lives in the business world. And the reason primarily is we just have to demand it. We have to believe that there is a better way. We have to get ahead of it. All the pressures I talked about at the beginning, the consumer, the regulatory, sustainability, those are only going to get greater and more complex. They're not going backwards. We thought they're kind of going to settle down and back to business norm. I think the new business strategy has to be all around data and foundational data. And then the outcomes, as Victoria mentioned, is what you do with that data. Thank you, Allison.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Matthew and Victoria, for joining us today to share more about specification management and OFI's specific use case. So we will now open it up for Q&A. If you haven't already, please put your questions in the Q&A function. But I am seeing one right here. Was there one benefit you saw from SpecRite that really sold the team on this system? I think probably for Victoria.
Sorry. Yes, it was the ability to make decisions quickly, to just be able to go in and even show before we even decided to move forward with it that we had we had, just as an example, we had 30 different suppliers, we had 500 different components. How do we make a decision? How do we move forward and say which components do we work with, which suppliers do we work with, and being able to put them all in a system, then pull reports and make data based off of metrics, make decisions based off of metrics, you know, to just be able to just theoretically talk to leadership about that was how we actually were able to move this forward.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions, but I will give it another minute here.
I think just real quick, as I piggyback on what Victoria said, you know, she's talked specific about obviously OFI, but generally there's definitely business cases that can be written. We can share those with you. There's a lot of use cases of success out there by various companies that have wanted to speak about it. So there's a lot of materials out there to help the company think through this process and what's best for them.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we're going to close out today. Thank you, IFT, for hosting us today. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining. As a reminder, this this presentation was recorded and you will be receiving a copy of it shortly. I did put how to reach out to SpecRite in the chat if you are interested in doing so afterwards. But thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your day. Bye. This window will now close.